You are on HOA mess. The mailbox cluster heard every threat. I will make an example out of you. That is what Monica Garcia screamed at me while jabbing her finger at my fence, which she claimed leaned 1 degree off plumb and constituted structural failure. She had a clipboard in a clear plastic sleeve and a measuring tape that she snapped open like a whip. The fence was 4 days old. I had not even finished staining it. Monica runs the Cedar Point Commons Association board as secretary, which means she controls every piece of paperwork that moves through the system. Portland, Maine is not exactly known for wild HOA drama, but Cedar Point is the exception. This is a neighborhood where group emails get used like public shaming posters, and Monica treats every violation like a federal crime. I work as a plumber, long hours, and I am tired of being interrupted by this kind of garbage. I just wanted a simple privacy fence so I could sit in my backyard without dealing with her staring at me from her kitchen window. The fence was 6 feet tall, cedar, professionally installed by a licensed contractor. I had submitted the plans to the HOA 3 weeks earlier. Radio silence. No response. Then, the moment the posts went in, Monica appeared with her clipboard and her measuring tape and her speech about structural integrity. She claimed the fence leaned 1 degree to the east and that I needed a full engineering survey before I could proceed. I told her the posts were set in concrete and plumb checked twice. She told me if I made her repeat herself, it would get more expensive. She handed me a laminated notice template with blank spaces that she had filled in by hand. Violation code, date, fine schedule, hearing date. It looked official until you realized the blanks were filled in with a ballpoint pen, and the signature line was just her initials. The fine started at $250 and doubled every 7 days. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday at 6 in the evening, which happened to be the exact time I was supposed to start a new job probation shift. I am on probation at the new plumbing company, which means I cannot miss shifts without risking termination. Monica knew that. She had asked me about my work schedule 2 weeks earlier, under the guise of being neighborly. I asked her where in the rules it said I needed an engineering survey for a standard privacy fence. She smiled and told me to make it public. She loved watching people get embarrassed. Then she walked back to her house, clipboard tucked under her arm, and I stood there in the drizzle with a half-built fence and a laminated threat in my hand. I called the contractor, a guy named Eddie, who had been doing fences in Portland for 15 years. He told me he had never heard of an HOA requiring an engineering survey for a basic residential fence, and that Monica was making it up. He said he would come back the next day to finish the panels, but if the HOA kept harassing him, he would have to walk. I told him to hold off until I sorted this out. Then I went inside, pulled up the Cedar Point covenants on my laptop, and started reading. There was no mention of engineering surveys. There was no mention of 1 degree tolerances. There was a section on fence height which capped it at 6 feet. There was a section on materials which allowed wood or vinyl. There was a vague sentence about maintaining a neat appearance, which could mean anything. That was it. Monica was claiming I needed approvals that did not exist, then daring me to prove otherwise. I emailed the management company, a firm called Crestview Property Services, that handled the day-to-day administration for Cedar Point. I attached photos of the fence, a copy of my original submission, and a polite request for clarification on the engineering survey requirement. The response came back in 45 minutes. They said they had no record of my original submission, and that I needed to resubmit everything, including a site plan, a materials list, and written approval from all adjacent neighbors. I forwarded them the original email with the timestamp. They said their system must have missed it and that I should resubmit anyway. That was the first sign that something was coordinated. Monica and Crestview were tag-teaming me. She would invent a violation, they would lose my paperwork, and I would be stuck in an endless loop of resubmissions while the fines piled up. I needed proof that this was intentional, not just incompetence. I went to my neighbor across the street, a retired teacher named Phil, who always seemed to be outside watering his lawn or trimming hedges. Phil had lived in Cedar Point for 12 years and had seen every version of the HOA board. I asked him if Monica had ever pulled this kind of stunt before. He paused mid-spray with his garden hose and told me she had done it to 3 other families in the past 2 years. One guy tried to install a deck and ended up in a 2-year battle over railing height. Another family wanted to repaint their shutters and got hit with cease and desist letters, claiming the color was not pre-approved, even though it matched the original builder color. Phil said Monica liked to target people who were new to the neighborhood or who worked irregular hours, because they were less likely to show up at meetings and fight back. Phil also told me that Monica had a history of selective enforcement. She ignored violations by her friends on the board, but she came down hard on anyone who questioned her authority. He said the best thing I could do was document everything, attend every meeting, and find other neighbors who were willing to speak up. He offered to be a witness if I needed one, and he said he would start taking photos of my fence from his side of the street every day. Same time, same angle, so I would have a timeline of identical lighting conditions to prove the fence had not moved or leaned. I thanked him and went back inside. The hearing was in 5 days. I needed a strategy. The next morning, I woke up to find a tow truck in my driveway. Eddie, the contractor, had come back to finish the fence panels, and Monica had called a tow company, claiming his truck was parked in violation of a fire lane. There was no fire lane. My driveway is a standard 2-car driveway with no markings, no curbs, no restrictions. The tow driver was a younger guy, maybe mid-20s, and he looked uncomfortable. He told me he got a call from the HOA saying there was an unauthorized commercial vehicle blocking access. I showed him my driveway, pointed out that there was nothing blocked, and asked him who made the call. He said it came through the HOA management office and that he was just following dispatch orders. Eddie came out of the backyard holding a fence panel and saw the tow truck. He dropped the panel and started yelling at the driver. I told him to stop, pulled out my phone, and showed the tow driver the photos Phil had taken the day before, the original submission email with the timestamp, and the Crestview response admitting they lost my file. I explained that this was a coordinated harassment campaign, and that if he hooked the truck, I would file a complaint with the city and send everything to his company. The driver looked at the photos, looked at Monica standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, and then told dispatch he was refusing the job. Monica started screaming that he was in breach of contract and that she would report him. He ignored her, got back in the truck, and drove off. Eddie told me he was done. He said he would finish the fence, but if Monica tried anything else, he was walking and I would have to find another contractor. I could not blame him. This was supposed to be a 2-day job, and it had turned into a circus. I told him to finish the panels and send me the final invoice. I would handle Monica. That afternoon, I got an email from Crestview saying my dispute packet had been received and forwarded to the board for review. I had not sent a dispute packet. I called Crestview and asked what they were talking about. The woman on the phone said they had a packet in my name submitted that morning and that it was being processed. I asked her to send me a copy. She said she could not do that because it was under review. I told her I did not submit anything and that someone was filing paperwork in my name. She put me on hold for 10 minutes, then came back and said it must have been an error and that they would look into it. I asked for a supervisor. She said the supervisor was out for the day and that I should call back tomorrow. I hung up and immediately filed a records request with Cedar Point under Maine's public records law. I requested all emails, notices, and communications related to my property for the past 6 months, including any correspondence between Monica Garcia and Crestview Property Services. The law required them to respond within 5 business days. I sent it certified mail and kept a copy for myself. The hearing was in 3 days. I spent the next 2 days pulling together everything I had, photos of the fence from multiple angles, the original submission email with the full header showing the send date and time, Phil's witness statement with same-day photos in identical lighting, the laminated notice Monica had handed me, the tow truck incident report that Eddie had filed with the towing company, the Crestview emails showing they kept losing my paperwork. I organized it all into a binder with tabs and made 3 copies. I also reached out to another neighbor, a woman named Lisa, who lived 2 doors down. Lisa was the one who sat near the front at every meeting and recorded everything on her phone. She told me she had been documenting Monica's behavior for over a year, and that she had recordings of at least 4 meetings where Monica admitted to targeting specific homeowners for enforcement while ignoring identical violations by board members. Lisa said she was waiting for the right moment to use the recordings, and if I was willing to go public at the hearing, she would back me up. The night before the hearing, Monica showed up at my door. I have a doorbell camera, so I have the whole thing on video. She rang the bell, waited about 5 seconds, then started banging on the door with her fist. I opened it, and she immediately launched into a speech about how I was making this harder than it needed to be, and that if I just paid the fine and removed the fence, we could move on. I told her the fence was legal, and that I had proof. She told me proof did not matter because the board had the final say, and the board always sided with her. She said if I made her repeat herself, it would get more expensive. I told her I would see her at the hearing. She smiled and said she never came by, and if I tried to say otherwise, she would call it harassment. I closed the door, pulled the doorbell footage, and added it to the binder. The hearing was set for 6 in the evening at the clubhouse. I had to call my supervisor and beg for a shift swap, which he grudgingly approved after I explained the situation. The management office closed at 5, which meant if I wanted to deliver the dispute packet in person before the hearing, I had 1 shot. I left work early, drove to the Crestview office in downtown Portland, and walked in at 4:30. The receptionist told me the account manager for Cedar Point was out for the day. I told her I needed to file a formal dispute and that I had a certified records request pending. She said she would leave it on his desk. I told her that was not good enough and that I needed a time-stamped receipt showing I had delivered it in person. She sighed, took the binder, scanned the cover page, and handed me a receipt with the date and time stamped on it. I took a photo of the receipt, the binder on her desk, and the timestamp on the office wall clock. Then I left. I got to the clubhouse at 5:45. The parking lot was already half full. Cedar Point meetings were usually sparsely attended, but word had gotten out that there was going to be a showdown. I saw Phil's car. I saw Lisa's car. I also saw Monica's car, parked in the front row with a reserved sign that was not official. The clubhouse exterior walkway was covered, with benches along the side and a set of double doors leading to the main room. People were gathering outside because the doors were still locked. Monica was standing near the entrance with two other board members, a man named Greg who served as treasurer, and a woman named Diane who was vice president. All three of them were holding clipboards. Monica saw me and smiled. I walked up and said I was here for the hearing. She told me the hearing had been moved to next week because of a scheduling conflict. I pulled out my phone and showed her the original hearing notice with the date and time. She said the notice was outdated and that I should have received an updated one. I told her I had received nothing. She shrugged and said that was not her problem. Lisa appeared next to me and held up her phone. She said she had been recording since I walked up and that if Monica tried to cancel the hearing after publicly scheduling it, she would file a complaint with the state HOA ombudsman. Monica's smile disappeared. She told Lisa to stop recording. Lisa said no. Greg stepped forward and said the hearing would proceed as scheduled and that we should all go inside. The doors unlocked at 6. About 20 people filed into the main room and took seats. The board sat at a table up front. I sat in the third row with Phil on my left and Lisa on my right. Monica called the meeting to order and went through the standard opening items: financial report, maintenance updates, upcoming events. Then she got to my case. She summarized the violation as failure to obtain proper engineering approval for a structural fence installation, and said the fine schedule was in effect as of the original notice date. She said I had submitted incomplete documentation and that the board had no choice but to uphold the fine and require removal of the fence within 30 days. She asked if I had anything to say. I stood up and said I did. I opened the binder and started walking through the evidence. I showed the original submission email with the full header. I explained that Crestview had claimed they lost it, then later admitted they had it. I showed the covenant section on fences, which had no mention of engineering surveys. I showed Phil's witness statement and the same-day photos proving the fence had not moved. I showed the laminated notice with the hand-filled blanks. I showed the tow truck incident report and explained how Monica had called a tow on my contractor for a fake fire lane violation. Then I played the doorbell video. Monica's voice came through the speakers, loud and clear, telling me she never came by and that I could not prove otherwise. The room went silent. Someone in the back row laughed. Monica stood up and said the video was edited and that I was fabricating evidence. I pulled out the timestamped file metadata on my phone and held it up. Lisa stood up and said she had recordings of 4 previous meetings where Monica admitted to selective enforcement and that she was prepared to turn them over to the state if the board did not address the pattern. Greg looked at Diane. Diane looked at Monica. Monica sat back down and said the board would take everything under advisement and issue a decision within 14 days. I said that was not acceptable. I said I had proof that Monica and Crestview had coordinated to harass me, and I wanted a vote tonight. Greg asked what proof. I said I was waiting on a records request response, but I was confident it would show email coordination between Monica and the management company. Monica said I was stalling and that without the records, I had nothing. I smiled and told her I let her think I was cornered because my trump card needed her to overreach. She asked what I was talking about. I told her I would explain in a moment. I sat down. Monica tried to move to the next agenda item. Phil stood up and said he wanted to make a public comment. He said he had lived in Cedar Point for 12 years and that he had watched Monica target family after family with fake violations and selective enforcement. He said the board had a responsibility to stop it, and if they did not, he He would circulate a petition to recall every member who voted to uphold the fine. 3 other people stood up and said they would sign it. Monica looked rattled. She called for a 10-minute recess. The board huddled at the front table. I checked my phone. I had an email from the records request. Crestview had responded early, probably because they were panicking. The attachment was a zip file with 34 emails, all between Monica and a Crestview account manager named Derek. I skimmed through them. Jackpot. The emails showed Monica asking Derek to delay my paperwork, flag my account for increased scrutiny, and coordinate the tow truck call. Derek had replied with suggestions on how to make it look procedural. One email explicitly said they needed to avoid putting anything in writing that could be used against them, and that they should handle enforcement verbally whenever possible. Another email showed Monica asking Derek to backdate a notice to manufacture a late fee. I stood up and interrupted the huddle. I said the recess was over and that I had the records. I forwarded the email chain to Greg and Diane, then projected it on my phone for the room to see. I read the key lines out loud. Monica tried to object. Greg told her to sit down. He read through the emails, then looked at Monica and asked if this was real. She said it was taken out of context. He said it was pretty clear context. Diane made a motion to rescind the fine and approve the fence as submitted. Greg seconded it. Monica tried to call for a board vote. Greg said they were voting now. The motion passed 2-1, with Monica as the only dissenting vote. Then Diane made a second motion to formally reprimand Monica for selective enforcement and to refer the matter to Crestview for an internal audit. Greg seconded it. The motion passed 2-1 again. Monica stood up, grabbed her clipboard, and walked out. The room erupted. People were clapping. Someone yelled that it was about time. Lisa hugged me. Phil shook my hand and said he knew I had it in me. But I was not done. The next morning, I called the towing company and spoke to the dispatch supervisor. I explained what had happened and sent him the email chain showing Monica had coordinated the fake tow call. He apologized and said the company had a zero-tolerance policy for fraudulent dispatch requests. He refunded the attempted tow fee, voided the contractor tow attempt, and said the company was canceling their contract with Cedar Point effective immediately. He also said he was filing a complaint with the Maine Public Utilities Commission because using a tow company to harass residents was a violation of state dispatch regulations. I forwarded that email to Greg and Diane. Greg replied within an hour saying the board was meeting an emergency session to address the management company relationship. 2 days later, Crestview sent a formal apology letter and announced they were terminating their contract with Cedar Point at the end of the month. Derek, the account manager who had been coordinating with Monica, was let go. The board hired a new management company and adopted an enforcement checklist that limited Karen tactics like backdated notices, verbal-only enforcement, and selective application of rules. Monica resigned from the board a week later. She sent a terse email saying she was stepping down for personal reasons. Nobody believed it. The truth was that her own selective enforcement had been documented in the meeting minutes, and the new management company had flagged her account for review. The board voted to remove her access to HOA files and to require dual signatures on all enforcement actions going forward. Phil told me later that Monica tried to rally her friends on the board to fight back, but nobody wanted to touch it. The email chain had made it clear that she had been abusing her position, and the towing company complaint had opened up potential legal liability for the HOA. The insurance company had advised the board to cut ties immediately. Eddie came back and finished the fence. He did not charge me for the extra days. He said it was worth it just to see someone stand up to an HOA bully and win. The fence looks great. It is still 6 feet tall, still cedar, still plum. I stained it a dark walnut color, and it has held up through 2 main winters without a single issue. Lisa ended up running for the board in the next election and won. She pushed through a transparency policy requiring all enforcement actions to be documented in writing with photographic evidence and neighbor witness statements. She also got the board to post meeting recordings online so residents could see what was happening without having to attend in person. Cedar Point is not perfect, but it is a lot better than it was under Monica. I still see Monica around the neighborhood sometimes. She does not make eye contact. She does not wave. She just gets in her car and drives away. I heard she tried to run for the board again the following year and got crushed in the vote. Turns out people have long memories when it comes to selective enforcement and coordinated harassment campaigns. If you enjoyed watching Karen's plan backfire, smash that like button and subscribe for more HOA revenge stories. The funny thing is, Monica had told me to make it public because she loved watching people get embarrassed. I did exactly that. I made the email chain public at the meeting, and she was the one who ended up embarrassed. Her own words came back to bite her in the most satisfying way possible. A records request that exposed contradictions and edits became the thing that unraveled her entire enforcement scheme. Karen's own selective enforcement got documented in the minutes, and the board adopted an enforcement checklist that limited Karen tactics. It was poetic justice in the cleanest possible form. A few months later, I got a call from a resident on the other side of Cedar Point who was dealing with a similar situation. Monica had targeted him before she resigned, and the new board was still working through the backlog of fake violations. I walked him through the process, gave him a copy of my binder template, and told him to request records early and often. He followed the playbook and got his case resolved in 2 weeks. The new management company was night and day compared to Crestview. I also started attending board meetings regularly, not because I wanted to get involved in HOA politics, but because I wanted to make sure the reforms actually stuck. Lisa did a great job, but there were still a couple of old guard members who wanted to go back to the way things were. Every time someone proposed a rule that felt like selective enforcement bait, I stood up and reminded the room what had happened with Monica. It usually shut down the conversation pretty fast. The fence became a minor legend in Cedar Point. People would point it out to new residents and tell the story of the HOA secretary who tried to find someone for a 1-degree lien and ended up losing her board seat over it. It was a cautionary tale about what happens when you abuse power and assume nobody will fight back. I kept the laminated notice Monica had given me. It sits in a drawer in my kitchen, and every time I see it, I remember the moment she handed it to me in the drizzle and told me I was going to be made an example of. She was right, in a way. I did become an example, just not the kind she wanted. I became an example of what happens when you document everything, find allies, and refuse to be intimidated by fake rules and coordinated harassment. Phil still takes photos of the fence every week. He does not need to anymore, but he says it is good practice in case anyone ever tries to pull something similar. He has a whole folder on his phone labeled Cedar Point Evidence, and he jokes that he is ready for whatever the next HOA crisis turns out to be. I told him I hope there is not a next one, but if there is, at least we know how to handle it. Lisa's recordings ended up being more useful than I expected. She turned them over to the state ombudsman as part of a broader complaint about HOA governance in Maine, and they used Cedar Point as a case study in their annual report. The report recommended new state-level oversight for HOA enforcement actions, including mandatory record-keeping and penalties for selective enforcement. The legislation has not passed yet, but it is making its way through committee, and Lisa has been testifying at hearings. She said if it passes, she is dedicating it to everyone who got screwed over by Monica and boards like hers. Eddie the contractor told me he uses my story when he trains new employees on how to handle difficult clients and HOA interference. He says the key lesson is to never assume the HOA is acting in good faith, always get everything in writing, and never let them intimidate you into walking away from a legal project. He also said he wished more homeowners fought back the way I did, because HOAs only get away with this stuff when people are too tired or too scared to push back. The new management company turned out to be competent and fair. They respond to emails within 24 hours, they do not lose paperwork, and they do not coordinate with board members to harass residents. It is amazing how much smoother things run when the people in charge are not actively trying to sabotage you. The board meetings are boring now, which is exactly how they should be. We talk about landscaping budgets and parking lot repairs, not fake violations and enforcement vendettas. I finished my probation period at the plumbing company and got moved to full-time status. My supervisor told me he respected the way I handled the HOA situation and that it showed I could deal with difficult people under pressure. He said that is a valuable skill in the trades, where you are constantly dealing with clients, inspectors, and contractors who do not always play fair. I told him I learned it the hard way, but I am glad I did. Monica moved out of Cedar Point about a year after she resigned. I heard she bought a condo in a building with no HOA, which is probably the smartest decision she has ever made. I do not know if she learned anything from the experience, and honestly, I do not care. She made my life hell for a few weeks, and I made sure she faced consequences. That is enough for me. The fence is still standing, still plumb, still legal. Every time I sit in my backyard and look at it, I think about the laminated notice, the tow truck standoff, the email chain, and the look on Monica's face when I played the doorbell video at the meeting. It was worth every hour of documentation, every sleepless night, and every moment of stress. Because at the end of the day, I proved that you do not have to roll over when an HOA tries to bully you. You just have to be willing to fight back with the truth. Until next time, take care.